Welcome in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark along with you on your Wednesday morning. Thank you once again to Elena Vaughter for hanging out with us in today's Garden Trust Hour. Certainly want to wish the best to the softball team as their season rolls along. Got a game coming up tonight taking on Winthrop.
That's SEC Pitcher of the Week.
SEC Pitcher
Elena
of the Week.
Vaughter to you,
yes.
Tyler.
Well, hey, I started off the show that way. I gave her proper accolades, and now she has another award to add to her 12-page list of awards she's already garnered in her prestigious softball career.
And defeater of Clemson.
So Chris brought up this point because they still have one more game against Clemson. Palmetto Series tied 5-5.
Mm-hmm.
Softball
Big
holds
pressure.
the key in that final game coming up here soon to put it over the top for South Carolina.
Love it. That was a great game between those two in Clemson. She threw like 1,000 pitches, I think.
12 innings, 153 pitches.
And her arm is still somehow
attached.
functioning.
It is still attached and has pitched in more games since then. So
I'm always amazed at the difference in baseball as far as how it's approached, what it does to your arm versus softball.
Yeah, she was like, I think she said, she gave us one example. She's like, I pitched 9, because they played like some inordinate amount of extra inning games for some reason this year. So I think she pitched like 9, was supposed to have a day off the next day, but ended up pitching an inning and then pitched a full game the next day. I'm like, how is that even possible?
So this past weekend against Ole Miss, she pitched, 15 innings between 3 games in 3 consecutive days.
Pretty absurd.
Which, again, from a baseball perspective, that's unheard of. Nobody would be doing that, especially not even throwing 153 pitches over the course of one game. Your arm would fall off. At least we think so.
What was that guy? It was the guy from Texas, I think, who threw like 200 pitches.
That's, was that
in the College World Series or in the
I think it was in a
NCAA
regional
tournament? Yeah.
Well, they might have been playing Stanford last year, actually. Yeah, he threw an absurd number of pitches. I do remember that now.
Yeah.
And this is actually somewhat normal in softball. So they're not abusing her arm or anything.
No, not at all.
I don't want to.
And she's obviously still pitching at a very high level, winning Pitcher of the Week.
I don't want to imply that, but yes. And she's getting a hit some now too.
Yeah.
I know she talked to us last time we had her on. That was a big reason she chose South Carolina was the opportunity to be a two-way player.
Hit a walk-off homer against Boston earlier this year.
Tyler did his research.
Well, she mentioned that on the show.
She did her research for Tyler. But no, that was good. I listened a little bit riding in. Always like to get the stories of the athletes here, maybe that people have not kind of dug into. And, that transfer class, we talked about it then, that transfer class for South Carolina softball, very, very impressive. And she was certainly a big part of that.
Yeah, and big football fan.
Yes.
Big Carolina football fan, especially going from Stanford, where the care level, little down right now, to South Carolina, where the care level is pretty high.
I don't know if you caught the point where I asked her the difference between the care of Stanford football and South Carolina football. She said most of the students at Stanford didn't know when football games were taking place. They were playing chess or doing homework. So a little bit different here in the SEC.
She said they were playing chess?
Well, she said she had a friend that was on the football team, and he came back to the dorm, and his friends were like, "Hey, where you been?" He's like, "Oh, we just played a home football game." Like, "Oh, we did?" Yeah, that's kind of perspective on how they care about it out there in Palo Alto, I guess.
Different.
Well, speaking of football, it does not look like she's going to be able to attend the spring game. They're going to be down in Gainesville taking on Florida that weekend. But we are roughly halfway through spring practice. Practice number 6 was yesterday. Heard from Beamer. We'll get some sound from him coming up as the show goes along. Sitting halfway through spring practice, and you guys have had the ability to be out there and observe a couple sessions already. What, if anything, have we learned so far?
Well, I think that's the question every fan always asks, like, hey, how do they look? What does it look like? I went back and kind of listened through Beamer's press conference yesterday for some stuff I was kind of writing on. And, I think first and foremost, quarterback competition is something rightfully so that, those are fun. That's something people talk about. It's a nice storyline. Beamer's going to continue to be asked about that. But 6 practices in, I don't really think it's a shock or a surprise to hear Beamer say, there hasn't been much separation yet. They're going to continue to battle it out. I would say even if there has been some separation internally, there's a lot of reasons a coaching staff would want to kind of keep the competition going, potentially, I don't want to say as long as possible, but maybe longer than even some fans are going to want to hear about. For one, you didn't promise Robbie Ashford a starting spot, but you did promise him an opportunity to compete. So 6 practices into a new offense at a new place when you haven't even scrimmaged yet, that's not enough time to really evaluate anything, in my opinion. And I think if you're in a situation where you're a quarterback, you're trying to play at your very best, you have to have an understanding of the offense. You have to have an understanding of your teammates. You have to have timing. So much of offense is based on timing. And you have a bunch of new receivers, new quarterback, lots of shuffling on the offensive line as far as who's going to play what and where. And it's just a lot of movement. The defense is rightfully so ahead of the offense right now. So my takeaway was just, for one, for what Beamer said, like I'm not shocked at all that we haven't heard a little bit more about some quarterback separation. Beamer said there probably will be, and he wants to see some separation this week with the first scrimmage on Saturday at Williams-Brice. But even then, if one guy is 12 for 15 and the other guy is 5 for 15, you created some separation in that moment. Does that mean anything big picture? I would argue probably not. Like, I don't think, and Dow Loggins really, when he talked a couple of weeks ago, it didn't feel like he was in any hurry to name a starter or some leader in this QB battle.
Well, and I think Shane Beamer, he hasn't come out and said, hey, when Spencer Rattler got here, he was immediately the starter. But he's kind of said some things in public settings that were like, hey, when Spencer got here, you kind of knew the direction it was going to go. And I think you might still be there with Lenoris Sellers, but to a lesser extent, right? Because you did bring in Ashford to compete, and the other guys. Sellers is not as much of a known commodity as even Rattler was coming from Oklahoma, right? But you got to remember, even when Spencer got here at South Carolina, it's not like he stepped on campus and before he even practiced, he's the starter. He's the number one. Even after a few practices, he's the starter. He's the number one. I don't even remember when he was officially named the starter. Was it after?
He never was.
It was just, here he is.
It just kind of happened.
Yeah.
Well, no, I think there's a good bit of separation between where it was with him and where it is right now with Lenoris.
Yes.
Because I remember, and I don't remember when, but Beamer was asked about it at some point.
Spencer, you mean?
No, Beamer was asked about it.
He was asked about Rattler, though? Is what you mean?
Yeah, Beamer was asked about Rattler. And even Beamer at the time, if I'm remembering correctly, I just don't remember when this was, he was kind of just like, it was like, you guys know.
Yeah.
Like, Rattler didn't come here to not start.
It's something that didn't really need to be said. Everybody kind of knew the situation.
Yeah, I remember there was never, we never wrote an article that was just like Beamer announces Rattler as starter.
Named starting quarterback.
There was no Rattler named starter as quarterback, if I remember correctly. I'm getting old, but I think you look at how Beamer has framed it up this year. Mm-hmm. It's been Lenoris will take the first snap of the spring, which he did, and then everybody's fighting for the job. So I think it's been framed as being a much more open thing, whereas it was almost just at some point it became assumed that Rattler was going to be the starter.
Well, I think it's
last year or 2 years ago.
I think it's interesting from the perspective, and we're kind of framing this as Lenoris Sellers versus Robbie Ashford. Davis Bevel could certainly be in the mix as well, as he comes in with some experience too. But if this was just, let's say, 2 true freshmen or 2 redshirt freshmen coming in with, Sellers, and let's say Ashford was in the same kind of boat there, I think it'd be a different story. But the fact that Ashford has starting experience in the SEC that theoretically could put him steps ahead of Lenoris Sellers at this point in his development leaves it a little bit more open-ended, where, again, you aren't going to know that answer, maybe not even until the week of we're playing Old Dominion in August to truly know who the starting quarterback is going to be.
Yeah, and I think pros and cons, there are eventually there will be some pros to naming a starter and that everybody knows this is the leader of our offense and potentially the leader of our football team. Right now, I don't think we're even close to that being a huge pro. I think right now, the pros are you want these guys to keep pushing each other. You don't want Ashford to get kind of demoralized. Like, hey, I came in here, I was supposed to get a free shake, a fair shake, and then they're already naming a starter. I think there's a lot of advantages right now to letting these guys keep fighting it out. To me, and I don't know, this is just guessing. We're speculating at this point. I would think this is going to be more of like a preseason, like preseason camp. I mean, August camp type of decision where I don't know necessarily if you take it all the way down to game week.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, could it be one of those things where publicly it's a game week announcement, but internally the guy. And sometimes it's not even announced. It's not a, hey, guys, gather around, team meet. It's, well, this guy's been taking all the first-team reps 3 weeks leading up to game one. It doesn't take you don't have to be a Stanford graduate like Elena to realize, oh, that guy's probably going to be the starting quarterback.
I tend to think, and I'm guessing too, I tend to think that they'll keep the competition going publicly and privately, but especially publicly, as long as you can. Probably go into preseason camp, and when Beamer's asked about it, preseason camp in August, yeah, Lenoris has taken most of the first-team reps, but Robbie's in there, Davis is in there, et cetera. And then at some point before game one against Old Dominion, he'll say Lenoris is going to start, if I had to guess.
Well, in game number one against a team like Old Dominion, not disrespecting the Monarchs here, but theoretically, we're hoping that's a game that South Carolina is going to win handily, that you have the opportunity to get both guys a significant amount of playing time. And next week, the second week game against Kentucky on the road in Lexington, you need to have your starter figured out by then. So hopefully that game number one can maybe serve as that final litmus test on who could be the guy in week number two.
How important is that first game to go ahead and grow up a little bit as an offense? Because the jump is massive going into week two. And I think that's a good point, man. Like, you really, and depending on how it plays out, maybe you're wanting to get both those guys reps, but also if Sellers, as we've been as we anticipate, if Sellers is the guy, like, where do you draw that line also on trying to get him as many reps as you absolutely can, considering some of us have already crowned him, but he's a redshirt freshman. I mean, he's thrown, 4 passes? So that's, in some ways, that's scary.
4 pretty good passes, but yes.
4 great passes, but still, that's kind of scary. By the way, so in the category of teas, there's some NFL news that I think could actually maybe affect some South Carolina guys in the NFL draft. And also, there's another quarterback decision that Shane Beamer does have to make this week.
We'll hit that coming up next. It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
Double T's.
That was good. Can't wait to go out to our next Firehouse Subs live on location. We were just talking about that. We don't know where yet, but we'll reveal it at some point in the month of April. What I do know is they have a new limited time offering, new sub for you. It's new, but it's kind of the old new, right? It has been around before. Maybe you remember it. Maybe you've never had it. It's a classic. That's a good one, Wes. The barbecue Cuban sub. It's got Southern roots with a Cuban twist. Man, this thing looks good. It's got the pulled pork. It's got cheese. It's got the pickles. It's got the slaw. It's got the honey ham on it. Looks absolutely outstanding. I've honestly not had a chance to have it yet, but I'm going to go get it ASAP. And when I do, I'm going to use the Rapid Rescue to go get it. FirehouseSubs.com is the easiest way to order. Use the Rapid Rescue to go. Avoid the wait and order online. Whether it's the new barbecue Cuban sub or one of your Firehouse Subs favorite, earn yourself some rewards points by ordering on FirehouseSubs.com or the Firehouse Subs app.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark along with you on this Wednesday. Reminder, the craft beer card is back. You can spend $30 at a brewery at 12 different craft beer locations. $360 value, all yours for just $79. Go online to 1075game.com. Click on the Sweet Deals tab for your chance to purchase the craft beer card. As Wes talked about at the end of that segment, there is a decision that has to be made very soon when it comes to quarterbacks in regards to the scrimmage coming up on Saturday. Let's hit cut number 4 here, Dave. Coach Beamer was posed with the question of if it'll be live or not.
It's a good question. I was thinking about that last night, Hale. I don't know yet. We've done that in the past, in the springtime and August. You know, last year we did in the scrimmages. We made everyone but Spencer and Luke were live, and we tackled. And it was good for them to understand that, you know, we've got 5 guys blocking and the defense brings a 6th guy, you're going to get hit. and you can't sit there and hang on to the ball. So it's good for them to learn from that standpoint. Some of those quarterbacks love it because I blew the whistle today one time, and Robbie Ashford was mad at me because he didn't think there was any way that the defender would have been able to make that tackle in a real game. Lenoris really stepped up last year in those situations where we made him live. So it's something that we'll talk about as a staff. I know it's a long answer to say I don't know yet.
It's an interesting conundrum, and I think back to last year's spring game where Lenora Sellers helped his team win the spring game by being a live quarterback, and he either got the touchdown or the two-point conversion. I can't remember exactly what the situation was there, but, you know, he got to be live in the spring game. We got to see him, you know, show his athleticism, show that ability to run, as opposed to Spencer Rattler, who, again, was in a non-contact, as you wouldn't have expected him to be. You know, but when you talk about especially trying to figure out who your quarterback's going to be, not that the decision's going to get made specifically off of one scrimmage or spring practice in general, but having these guys be live, showing off their athleticism in true game type scenarios can go a long way in making that decision.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of layers to this conversation, and I think there's a reason Beamer said, "Hey, we haven't made the decision yet," because I think you could make a very compelling argument on either side. He kind of made a little bit of the argument to the have them live side, and that's just, do you get true reps? You can get close, but do you get true reps without the threat of a quarterback being hit? And also, do you get a true evaluation if you have quarterbacks with running ability without them being able to run away from the defense and break tackles and stuff like that? Maybe not. Now, of course, the downside is a massive one, and that's the threat of an injury. And, you know, I would argue there's a huge difference between having your true freshman quarterbacks who at the time, you know, were third or fourth on the depth chart, redshirt freshman quarterbacks. I guess it would have been who would it have been at that point? Braden Davis, had he left yet? Tanner. I mean, it's
Colton.
It's a huge difference between having those guys live versus now we're talking about a quarterback battle for number one, for the top spot, and potentially getting Sellers or Ashford injured in practice. You know, injuries are going to be a part of the games potentially, but in practice. Now, the other layer to me is it's April the 3rd right now. So getting a guy bruised up or dinged up now is different than maybe saying, "Oh, we got our quarterbacks going live in August." You're never Sellers and Ashford. I could all but guarantee will not be live in scrimmages in August.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of layers to this, and it's one of those things. If you can get through it with them being live, it sounds great. But the second you get one of those guys hurt, remember Perry Orth getting
Stole my content, Wes.
I'm reading your mind, man. Broken collarbone?
Yeah, during the scrimmage during the spring, had to miss the spring. Now that wasn't a torn ACL, but he missed the whole spring.
Lots of reps,
and they were already down because our guy Lorenzo Nunez had hurt his knee like the week before.
Live,
and so then now you're down 2 quarterbacks, so not great. And you don't want that to happen.
What would y'all do? See, it's tough.
It is tough. You do have the time element on your side. If, God forbid, knock on wood, it doesn't happen, somebody were to get hurt, because you are in early April, not, as you mentioned, again, in August. And again, when you're talking about trying to figure out the difference between these two guys, I think it's valuable enough to have these guys getting those live reps and, seeing what the difference is in these game type situations.
Yeah, I'm just going to make this up. I don't even know if this, I'm going like semi-live. You know what I mean?
Define semi-live.
Like thud. Like let your quarterback get hit a little bit. You can't go out there and lay a shot on a guy. Right? Be smart.
Like in the grasp type tackling, essentially.
Let him get bothered. You do see in practices where the quarterback isn't live, they do have that early whistle on the quarterback, man. Like if somebody's breathing on them, they're blowing the whistle, and the quarterbacks normally even get mad.
Sure.
And there's a good reason for that. A quarterback breaks the pocket and goes and scrambles. They're not even letting him get close to finishing the run. They're blowing the whistle. Let's get a little bit closer to live. But, man, I would just be so, especially because of South Carolina's quarterback situation. You know, I don't really like the idea of going live. You've got benefits to it. You go throughout this throughout the whole team, too. It's the whole, how much do we tackle in practice? Mm-hmm. Because if you say we're not going to tackle or we're barely going to tackle, by the time that you get to the season, if you're struggling tackling, what is the issue? One of the potential issues is, well, you didn't tackle enough in practice. How are you going to do it in a game, right? So it is a tough decision to make.
I think if you're going to let them tackle, and this is kind of to Chris's point, too, what he was talking about, if you're going to let the quarterbacks get hit, it's got to be, all right, guys, you're protecting your teammates, and if you go low on my quarterback, you are kicked out of the scrimmage. Like, literally.
Or maybe the team.
Yeah, like, literally, if you go low, then you go to the locker room.
Yeah.
Like, I would make it that serious. Like, if there are any late hits on the quarterback, if there are any low hits on the quarterback, I would make it that, like, go run the stadium. I think you're going to have to put in a few barriers there. I lean towards protecting the QBs, but maybe you go first scrimmage of the spring, like Saturday.
Yeah.
Everybody's live, and then from that point forward, you shut it down. I would shut down, as far as getting hit, Sellers and Ashford, and I would have the other guys, frankly, all out live.
And you bring up an interesting
and Doty.
You bring up an interesting point of kind of laying some ground rules, like, hey, if we are going to go live, here's what you can and can't do with quarterbacks. And I think everybody would understand that, obviously knowing the situation the team is in, but also tackling is an imperfect art. So you can tell guys, hey, don't hit them low, and somebody could trip while attempting to tackle a quarterback and hit somebody in the knee, and then we have a catastrophe on front of our hands. So I think even laying ground rules down doesn't even prevent things that from happening.
Yeah, it's not perfect. It's not perfect by any means. And, and you, frankly, in scrimmages, you tell the defenders to protect their teammates anyway, not just quarterbacks, but you still have, you've got these massive human beings crashing into each other.
Right. It's car crash.
You're gonna have fingers get broken. You're gonna have issues hitting the ground like that. Grant, you always in scrimmages, if you look back, you're gonna have more guys banged up after a scrimmage than you are regular practice. That's just a fact of football. I feel like you got to minimize that with quarterbacks, but you can't turn it into flag football either. So it's a fascinating decision for this staff, I feel like.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens. Again, that scrimmage coming up on Saturday. Reminder, tonight, coming up, you got baseball action taking on Georgia Southern. First pitch at 7 o'clock, pregame coverage starting at 6:45 right here on The Game. We'll come back and we will pay off Wes's other masterful tease from a few minutes ago. Gamecocks as it relates to the NFL. What's going on with that? We'll hit that next. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game. Welcome back in. It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark along with you here on this Wednesday. Wes decided to be the master of teases today. We talked about the quarterbacks going live in the spring game in the last segment. Now he is yet to reveal the information of this NFL topic that he wants to discuss.
Well, I think it could end up being something that affects South Carolina, particularly Xavier Legette. So I got asked to later this week to be on the Cover Zero podcast, which is one of the big Buffalo Bills podcasts. And they want me to come on and talk about Legette because they've been hearing quite a bit about Legette potentially being the Bills draft pick.
Yes.
Well, Adam Schefter now reporting that Stephon Diggs is being traded from the Bills to the Texans. So Legette was being mentioned, obviously, even prior to this. Speculation, no doubt, but still mentioned as a potential for the Bills. I'm just wondering, now the Bills are in line for a need at wide receiver. All of a sudden, is Legette, are the odds going up that Legette could be playing in Buffalo?
I think there's a very good chance, and I think he could kind of slide into that same type of role that Stephon Diggs occupies to be the one on that team. And gosh, Josh Allen thrown to Xavier Legette, that would be very, very fun to watch. I can only imagine how Veltry's thinking about this, and probably Dave dreaming of what could be.
Yeah, whatever he's thinking is a very extreme opinion, I'm sure. He was ready to
all time.
Ready to fire everybody, and then the Bills went on a run. That is an interesting point, though. Interesting trade, too, by the way.
Yeah.
Stephon Diggs going.
And that would, if they picked him up with their pick in the first round, that would slide him into the back half around pick 28, which is a few picks higher than obviously where he's projected to be in the beginning of the second round. So kind of in that same type of area.
Yeah, and I think he's a guy you can make a case for late first, early second. Obviously, that could go either way. And, and if teams feel comfortable, sometimes they'll slide back a little bit as well if they feel like a guy's that they want is going to be available. So, again, and I've learned over the years, you cannot predict this stuff at all. Like I've had guys, especially you get later and later, like I've had guys, families tell me, hey, agents are saying these 5 teams are most likely. These 5 teams are next most likely. These 5 teams are after that. And then it would be a team not even on the list that ends up drafting the guy. So this stuff is inherently unpredictable, but it feels like there's been a lot of Panthers mentioned with Legette. And now there's been some Bills mentioned I've read online, but this just seems like it would increase their need at that position. And if you have what they have and you have your quarterback, the last thing you want to do is you have this championship window. The last thing you want to do is hamper one of the best quarterbacks in the league. When everybody's looking to find their quarterback, you have your guy. The last thing you want to do is hamper him without having the targets necessary to go win on offense. And you can get a guy on a rookie deal with as much athleticism and speed as Legette. That tends to make sense. The one question I would have there is just Legette, I would guess he hadn't played a single game in the snow in his entire life. So.
I was going to ask what he thinks about the cold because, it doesn't seem like he's ventured too far outside of Mullins and Columbia in his life.
Well, and how much does that affect guys' ability to consistently catch the football? Like, is that a fact? I mean, these NFL teams, they consider everything. So is that a big factor with NFL teams as far as, well, this guy is from the Southeast. He's never seen cold like this. I don't know. Could that be a tiebreaker potentially?
I did. As soon as you mentioned Buffalo for Legette, I did his voice in my head. Like, it's cold up there, like a Xavier Legette voice. But he has, in seriousness, where you generally see him going, it is tough, like you said, Wes. Once you get past, like, the first, 10 picks, even there's some unpredictability even in that, right? But you generally know, okay, this guy's probably a first-rounder. But when you get into, like, the mid-rounds, like a Spencer Rattler, like, it's pretty tough to project where he's going to go. The consensus that I get is that he's probably like a 4th-rounder, Spencer Rattler. maybe gets into the third. He could always get to like the fifth. You never know when you're a mid-round type guy. But there are some guys that, like Xavier Legette, that he's kind of like, I guess maybe a fringe first rounder would be the best classification, because he could sneak into the back few picks. But generally what you see in mock drafts, again, imperfect science, and what you hear kind of in the NFL scouting community with people I talk to, is that he's a second rounder. He seems kind of firmly in there. And I've seen, like you said, Wes, I've seen the Panthers. Here's a 4-round mock draft from NFL.com. Has him number 46 to the Colts. I know Field Yates just put his new 2-round mock draft out recently. He's got Legette going pick 34, so very early in the second round, to the New England Patriots, right? So kind of all around for him, which you would expect. Nobody really knows in the second round. Point is, consensus is he seems to be a second-round type guy, which is great for him.
And again, it's one of those kind of things where the projections stand that way up until the draft, but again, it's based on who goes where as far as where the other wide receivers get picked up, who needs what trades get made over the course of the draft. So he has the opportunity to maybe slide into the back half of the first round, but it seems like his floor is early second at this point in time.
Yeah, not to turn this into a Texans show, but dude, they're putting some guys around should have been a Panthers draft pick, C.J. Stroud.
Salty.
I mean, you had Nico Collins, Tank Dell were big for them last year, and now you're adding a guy like Diggs, who Diggs is starting to get up there, but he's still got some gas in the tank, man. Like this guy is a difference maker. So interesting. The Bills traded him for. They get a 2025 second-round pick in exchange for Diggs, a 2024 sixth-round pick, and a 2025 fifth-round pick. So it's a financial move, but not a big return there.
I do wonder, because there was a lot of conversation happening last year during the season about maybe a rift between Diggs and the Bills and Diggs and Josh Allen, maybe something like that continued to boil over after the season, where they said, you know what, we're just going to see what we can get for you and move you on to somewhere else and try and get something else for the value.
Well, and that's why people, including me, Panthers fans, were kind of like, you look at what they got for Brian Burns, you're like, right. You didn't get anything. But when you've got like a contract situation or a player's unhappy, you kind of just got to get what you can.
Sure.
At some point. But
they brought in Clowney.
They did bring in Jadeveon Clowney, which is awesome. And
got his number 7 back.
By the way, I mentioned Rattler. I looked this up in that 4-round mock draft from NFL.com that I was talking about earlier. I wanted to see where they had Rattler slotted. They actually have him right now in the 4th round to the Atlanta Falcons, early in the 4th round, pick number 109. Thoughts on that, Tyler?
I wouldn't hate that. Before the Falcons made the move for Kirk Cousins, I thought if you drafted a Spencer Rattler in one of the middle rounds, while you still, I guess at that point, because I think Heineke was already gone, but bring him in as competition to Desmond Ridder, I think Rattler could have won that job. But now you have the opportunity for him to sit behind a guy like Kirk Cousins, theoretically for a couple seasons. Well, Kirk Cousins is in his mid-30s or whatever. Rattler's coming in not expected to be kind of a day one type of guy, had the opportunity to learn from a guy that's been around the league for a long time. I think that's kind of a best case scenario for Rattler to theoretically maybe take the reins one day down the road in a couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a good situation for Spencer. I don't want to say anywhere he goes, right? But he's not going to be expected to be a guy that's going to come in and, hey, you got to start right now. And It might, like a Bryce Young situation. You got to start right now. And by the way, we're not putting you in a good situation at all. It's going to be a struggle. Most likely he's going to be able to just go in and compete for a job. Maybe he sits behind an established starter. But I think when you look at Rattler, this seems to be the consensus of a lot of teams. Like, he has what you're looking for in a guy that can maybe be your backup. And as you said, Tyler, over time, be ready to take the reins, whether that's out of necessity because of an injury or ineffectiveness, or if he eventually just wins a job. But he's not going to have that immediate pressure on him that you see in first-round picks who are sometimes going to a team that's not very good, to be quite frank.
Right. We will come back and wrap up today's edition of the Garnet Trust Hour. Coach Beamer touched on this a little bit yesterday. There was one dismissal from the team that was confirmed. We'll dive into that coming up. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
That was our decision. Think a lot of Kelton, wish him well, but there's a expectation level of how we're going to do things in this program, inside this building and outside this building, and just a body of work that wasn't what we wanted as well. And care about him, want to help him in any way. Told him I would call anybody for him. He's a guy that has ability and be pulling for him, but just he won't be here.
Welcome back in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler at West Metro, Chris Clark, along with you for a couple more minutes, wrapping up today's edition of the show. That was Coach Beamer yesterday in his presser talking about Kelton Henderson, wide receiver for the Gamecocks, being dismissed from the program here recently, and there's a lot of details to this, but it just kind of seems like the team and Kelton did not see eye to eye on some things. Yeah, and I think it was one of those things that built up over time, certain decisions. Beamer mentioned outside and inside the building, so decisions off the field, so to speak. And really, and obviously Beamer's not going to give a ton of details on that, but also just did at least confirm what we had sort of hinted at, was that, hey, this was not his decision. This was not Kelton Henderson's decision, I should say. This was not he's entering the portal just because he wants to. Didn't really have a choice, and obviously South Carolina, they'll help him out. Beamer means that when he says that, as far as finding a new place. Talented kid, there's some ability here, but just had not quite obviously put it together in terms of doing all the things needed to be successful at South Carolina.
And I think, quick point on this, when you just look back, we've discussed this before, in the offseason, Shane Beamer identified wide receiver as an area where, he wanted to get better everywhere, but that was one where he made, a shift, a change in terms of the coaching staff. And so I think, man, you start looking back at 2021, 2022, 2023 recruiting classes, they needed to have more impact receivers. And there's been different reasons for that, but that's one reason that he made that change. And so, obviously, there's been some interesting things that happened with the receiver coaching position, but Mike Furry in place now, it'll be very important to not only develop the younger guys that they do have on campus right now, but you also have several transfers, and then high school recruiting, I think, is going to be critical to kind of get that turned around in 2025 and beyond. So again, Kelton Henderson dismissed from the program. Coach Beamer adding his thoughts on that yesterday. ESPN has released their top 25 players remaining in the women's NCAA tournament as we head into the Final Four coming up this weekend. Wild guess on who number one in this one is going to be.
Does she play for Iowa?
Yes, she does. It is Caitlin Clark at number one. Paige Becker is coming in at number two.
And by the way, so we'll be hearing from Olivia Thompson tomorrow, 10 o'clock, Garnet Trust Hour. Already recorded that one. Going to have some really good thoughts on somebody who actually has faced off with Caitlin Clark and with Paige Becker. So everybody be sure to tune into that. And I've been kind of, I don't know, I think these are more based on how the players have been performing in the last few games, because you had Fulwiley was at one iteration of this list, which they've updated it as we've gone along. At one point, Fulwiley was South Carolina, I think their best. Did I say that the other day? Best player.
Yeah, that she was the highest. She was number 9 or something overall.
And that was going into Sweet 16, I think, or Elite 8. And now it's been updated, and so the highest rated Gamecock is Cardoso again.
Yep.
And so Cardoso,
number 5.
5th. And making a big push here, Raven Johnson, who I don't think was on the list last time, she's 6th. Which I think it's not an easy job, obviously, to accurately kind of rank these. Even harder, I think, to know where to put South Carolina, because the team is built so much more differently than every other team that are in this Final Four.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Malaysia Fulwiley being at the top for Carolina last time, dropped all the way down to number 21 on this list, right behind Bree Hall.
And she, you know what? Here's the thing about Fulwiley. She did not play a ton the last 2 games and was a little bit off, I feel like, but generally I feel like she bounces back in a big way. And I still, and I talked about this with Liv Thompson as well, I think when it comes down to it, as South Carolina faces better and better teams, who's the person that South Carolina is going to count on to just kind of go off? And that's been a different person in different games. But when you look at Fulwiley down the stretch of the SEC tournament, I tend to think she's going to be a huge part
Yes.
of whether or not South Carolina wins or loses in this Final Four. And I'll be curious if it does get to Caitlin Clark, South Carolina, Iowa. I would imagine there's going to be times where Fulwiley's going to be asked to go guard her and use her speed, use her quickness to guard her. But in the meantime, number 3 on this list, Isaiah James from NC State, the lefty guard who has had a huge tournament so far. I tend to think the key to South Carolina at this point, can't nobody look past this Wolfpack team because they'll get you if South Carolina does.
Yeah, they've been playing much better basketball in the tournament. Look, this was a team that finished second in the ACC, just lost out on the ACC championship game to Notre Dame, so had a good regular season, but they've elevated their game in this tournament, and they are no stranger taking down big teams. They took down the 2 seed in Stanford, and then most recently took down the number 1 seed on their side of the bracket in Texas just to punch their ticket to the Final Four. So they are no strangers to taking down some of the best in the country. Beat UConn earlier on the season, as well as Colorado. And, I think they're going to play this underdog card to their advantage, or at least try to, taking on the best team in the country in South Carolina and, being that one team that nobody is talking about going into this weekend.
Yeah, you look at this list, they have, again, Raven Johnson 6th, Kate Martin for Iowa 7th. She's averaging 14 and almost 10 rebounds. However, are you taking Kate Martin over most of the people on South Carolina's team? I would argue no.
Probably not.
So sometimes some of it's production versus talent, and
for sure,
a lot of different ways you could do it.
Well, we have the weekend to see how it all shakes out and how all these individual players fare in the Final Four. That'll do it for today's edition of Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show up next here in the game.
Another one of our outstanding partners here on the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour on the Game, Michael, Nathan, and their entire team at Integrated Media. They've been out to my home. They've been to West Mitchell's home. They can come out to your home, too, or your business, actually, and help you with an outstanding audio-visual setup. They can do everything from just organizing things. If you got equipment laying all around where the wires are all exposed, all ugly, look terrible, look disorganized, they can clean that up for you and make it make sense. They can also mount a new television for you. They can do security systems. They can do cameras so you can check out what's going on. They can do a home theater system. They can put in Sonos wireless speakers. Make sure your internet signal is outstanding at your home or your business, and they can help you control all of that from your mobile device. That's a complete smart home system. IntegratedMediaInc.com is where you can go to check out their services, or 803-948-8327, Integrated Media.